Okay, I think we've got a lot of folks in here already, and anyone who's late will just play a little bit of catch up. So, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're logging in from. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's webinar is Multi-Facility SNF Growth: How WeCare Scaled Up. We're really thrilled to have everyone who's joining us. Just some quick housekeeping before we dive in. Please use the chat function if you have any questions. There's also a Q&A box. We're going to try to leave some time at the end to get to as many of those as we can. Yes, the webinar is being recorded. Yes, you will receive the recording after the call. Yes, somebody at some point will probably ask me if that's going to happen, and that's totally cool. Let me start out by introducing myself. Hi, I'm Morris Isaacson, the EVP of Sales and Marketing for Empeon. If you're not familiar with Empeon, let me tell you a little bit about us. So at Empeon, we help healthcare organizations like many of yours gain clarity, control, and confidence when it comes to workforce management. We know that building a high performance healthcare business doesn't just happen, it takes strategy, the right people, and the right tools. In today's conversation, we're going to explore one of the biggest challenges in skilled nursing, and that's scaling smartly. In the SNF industry, buying and selling facilities is common. Um, Scaling while keeping your staffing at their best, keeping operations flowing, and keeping compliance under control, that's frankly where many organizations struggle. Too often, growth leads to things like operational bloat that slows down decision making and inflates cost. It leads to disjointed systems, band-aids, or what I like to call the Frankenstein solution that causes errors, it creates confusion, limits visibility across your facilities. Growth can also lead to compliance gaps that increase regulatory and legal risk. Heavy reliance on costly agent staffing that strains budgets and can disrupt your team's cohesion. And maybe worst of all, it can lead to a decline in quality care that impacts residents and your reputation. A 2025 healthcare workforce trend analysis found that every shift that's filled by contract nurses can inflate labor costs anywhere from 20 to 50%, which is really just a bonkers stat. Meanwhile, Mission Care's 2025 report showed that high employee turnover tends to correlate with lower CMS ratings, and that facilities that reduce turnover by 30%, which I realize is not at all a small feat, they saw an improvement of at least 1 star in their CMS rating. These are just a few of the reasons that I'm really excited to introduce today's speaker, Gedaliah Wielgus. He's the CFO and co-founder of WeCare Centers. WeCare has grown from a small number of SNFs to a multi-state network, all while avoiding those common pitfalls that crop up all the time during expansion. WeCare has basically eliminated agency use across their sites, which I'm sure Gedaliah will tell you proudly took some serious work. They unified their software systems and gained real visibility into financial and workforce performance. Today, you're going to hear how they achieved this success with a strategic focus and with support from platforms like Empeon, which help centralize HR, payroll, and scheduling onto one system. Gedaliah brings a deep experience in healthcare finance and operations, and he's here today to walk us through how WeCare made scaling look easy, even when at times it probably wasn't. That's why I'm glad to have this conversation. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Gedaliah. Hi, Gedaliah.
Is that my cue?
That is your cue. Thank you so much
Oh,
for joining us. I'm actually, instead
yeah.
of flipping through the slides over here, I'm going to just leave things. Um, I'll probably stop the share actually. Let's just
Yeah,
have a conversation, right?
certainly.
Um, so, hey, Gedalia, I know that WeCare started off small and now you're a multi-state organization. I'd love it if you could share the story. What was WeCare's growth from where you started to where you are today?
So the origin, first of all, thank you. And just allow me to introduce myself quickly, although you were able to read it and you did not, you did a pretty good job on the pronunciation of the last name. So I accept it. My name is Gedaliah Wielgus. I am a CPA licensed in the great state of New York. I am the CFO and co-founder of WeCare. WeCare started in December of 2017. We started with two of the smallest facilities in New York. We had a 46 and a 29 bed facility. You heard me correctly, 29 beds. We later bought a 28-bed building, which really made us, that was interesting. We had three buildings with 100, I think 3 beds altogether. If my math's right, maybe 104. This was in 2017. Since then, we've acquired more facilities, and we've also gotten rid of some facilities. I always like to say that it's sometimes easier to buy a nursing home than to sell one, if that makes any sense. That's just my experience. But you are correct. Well, one thing you're incorrect on is you said the things we've done correctly to scale. We've made a million mistakes on our way there. So I think for this webinar, I'm going to share some of the mistakes we made and kind of how we fixed them and where we went from there.
Yeah, I'd love that. Maybe if you just want to talk a little bit about some of those challenges. What are as you grow, what were some of the challenges you guys faced?
So I'll just say on the payroll side of things, and this is where I kind of want to start. There was a point in time, I want to say 2017, 18, and 19, where I believe we had 6 facilities and 5 different payroll softwares. Okay. And I'll get into why that happened. A lot of people want to know what taking over a nursing home is like. I'm sure a lot of people have questions on that. But I'll tell you, in my experience, and my background is not in healthcare, I'm a CPA, and I started my career in public accounting, and then I went private, and then I moved on and started working in facilities. But for us, it was a fear. When you take over a facility, you're always, what's your main worry? My main worry as a CFO is, am I going to mess up payroll, right? I think when you come into a new facility, what is the expectation of the facility? It's that I hope these new operators know what they're doing. They don't screw up payroll. And that's a fear-based thing. So when we started in my first few takeovers, I left the payroll systems in place. And I said to myself, you know what? The facility already knows, the person who's doing payroll already knows, they know what to do. I'll be able to save a lot of time and energy and effort. That's what I did for the first few years. That's not a way to scale. I'll be very honest. That was I don't want to say a mistake. And I understand why I did it. Obviously, I made a decision, and I understand why other operators would do it, but it's not the correct way to do it. At the end of the day, when you're small and you have only a few facilities, you can do it. You can have one person do a bunch of different payrolls. But at the end of the day, it can become a disaster. I'll just remind everyone backwards into COVID, which was what, 2019? Was it 2019, 2020? There was a lot of government programs out there. PPP was a big thing. ERC was a big thing. Imagine trying to qualify for all these programs when your software wasn't the same. It was a nightmare. I remember having to go to different payroll companies, some that we had left, some that we were with, just to get the reports out. And it really led us to a lot of challenges. What we did, or this was a decision made over time, is eventually I decided that the best way to do this is to really centralize everything, really make everything one. It started with our IT company. We had one IT company, it was okay, and we moved to another IT company, and we stuck everything in the cloud. And then from there, we went to Empeon, which I remember. Empeon, when we started with them, was, I believe, a smaller company. And I remember it was Israel Krause who came down to our office to sell us on it. And we liked the idea of it. For us, I think one of the primary things is, I don't know if people know this on the call, I imagine some of you are payroll people. There's normally 2 softwares for time and attendance and payroll. And, for us, when you have all these facilities using 2 different softwares and every building's using a different one, it was a disaster. We had a building, I don't want to say the name of the building, it's in Shore, New York. And I remember we switched payroll softwares and told everyone, please don't use the old time clock. And we plugged in the new time clock, all good. And we saw a lot of punches were missing. We had found out that the building went and took the old time clock, replugged it in the conference room, and had everyone clocking in on the old system. It's a true story. Disaster. And not only that, when you have 2 different systems, you have to make sure system A works, it's able to export properly, and then you bring it into payroll, and then you run payroll. So what we did is we went to one. The thing that we liked about Empeon specifically is that Empeon software was all-inclusive, meaning the time and attendance and the payroll was all together. You're clocking in, it's going to translate into payroll. This made a massive difference for us, I can't tell you. And over the next few years that we had brought Empeon in and took time to bring every building in and change payroll systems is not easy. And whether or not I would do it differently, probably, I think I'd try to start with one company at the beginning, although I know a lot more now than I did then. But after a while, it started to work. And today I'm going to share with you just some things that we do as a company some things that we do payroll related, some things that we do technology related. That I don't know if it sets us apart from everyone else, but at least I think it's become our standard best practice. Specifically how we review things and what we look for and what we look at. And yeah, I think that's the basic intro to WeCare. Did I give you any of the story, or I kind of,
No,
half?
that was great. I love
Yeah.
it. That's a good like 30,000 foot view.
Mhm.
Let's dig a little bit into the nitty gritty. Talk to me about those KPIs, whether it's payroll. What are you monitoring across all your facilities to know that things are working?
So when we started, it was I remember this. When we started, you know how we looked at payroll? I remember looking, I had one person doing it in all the buildings, different systems, and she would send me the gross payroll. And I remember thinking to myself, if this number is not so off from the prior week, we're doing a good job. That took into account basically nothing. Okay. And this is the first few years, right? I look at the numbers and I say, okay, they're somewhat in line. But payroll tells a much bigger story than that. And nowadays, especially with CMS becoming very focused on PBJ staffing, we're in two states. We're in New York and Pennsylvania. They both have minimum staffing requirements. Staffing is highly regulated, but more than that, it shows up on your star ratings. It is reflected in reimbursement. And in certain states, they could penalize you, they could fine you, they could put tags on you. So it tells a much bigger story when you're looking at payroll than just, oh, what's the dollar amount? So that was a shift many years ago, a bunch of years ago. I remember it was November, and the buildings were getting a little out of control payroll wise. Just wasn't working. The numbers were not making any sense to us. And this is, I would say, a standard now that we created at WeCare, and I'll share with everyone what we do. Decided that we're not going to review payroll, just the payroll person and myself looks at it. We're going to stop doing that. We made payroll for us as what's the word I'm looking for? A fully integrated thing, meaning we look at the payroll every single week in my office. We have the administrator, I have the head of payroll and HR, I have a payroll person, my VP of ops, and my VP of clinical all come into the payroll. And I think about this a lot because certain companies, we don't do this. What they look at for meetings is they take an average of the salaries and they say, every person I'm inviting to this meeting is costing me X amount of dollars. So is it really worth it to have all these highly paid people into the payroll? And I've thought about this and I think about this all the time. And you know what? Payroll at the end of the day is 65, 70% of my expense. At the end of the day, people are the most important thing to us, right? We run a people business, take care of people, our residents and our staff. And this is a serious thing. And at the end of the day, you can have questions. And if you can't get the answers in real time or nobody knows what they're talking about, it doesn't help you. So in that November of, I want to say maybe 22, I think it was 22. Let's pretend it was 22. We started this new system and we've been doing this for the last several years. And, the admins have to come on. And again, we switched it over time. It used to be for the first 2 years, I would go through and ask the questions. But in the last 6 months to a year, we switched it up. The administrators are now running us through their payrolls. They're explaining variances for us, right? And by variances, I know you were asking about KPIs. I still do look week over week, right? At the end of the day, I have a trend. I look at 4 weeks of payroll, 6 weeks of payroll. I always want to look at the averages, right? At the end of the day, if you're running a good building, if you're running a certain building with staff, right? Every building has the same structure. They need an administrator, they need a DON, they have MDS people, right? I'll just add, WeCare as a company does not outsource anything. We don't outsource therapy. We have very little agency, which I'll get into soon. So your structure should remain the same, right? If things are changing in payroll, what are you looking at? Well, the things we look at is obviously overtime. Overtime is a huge thing. And by overtime, I also mean overtime creep. So it's not people that are working an extra shift. That happens all the time. I will add, and I always say this to my administrators, and trust me, this is true. And if SD Lermer is on this presentation, which she may be, she'll know this to be true as well. In PBJ, when you're submitting and whatnot, CMS wants to know why people are working so much overtime. There are certain thresholds that they say, what are you doing? And what I mean by that is you have an employee that works 40 hours of overtime in a week. Yeah, you might have staffed it, but at the end of the day, CMS is asking the question you should be asking. How good can that person be after 80 hours of work taking care of people, right? So it's not only the overtime creep, it's what's really happening. Are we tracking our employees? or making sure that our employees aren't burning themselves out, right? I think that's a critical thing for us that we're looking at. But back into overtime, we look at it, and the creep side of it is sometimes you'll see certain staff that will stay an extra half hour, will come an extra half hour. It seems harmless, but in the grand scheme of running 52 or 26 payrolls a year, and you're talking about hundreds of employees over a system or even more, it's tens and tens of thousands of dollars the overtime creep. So we're always looking at that. We look at bonuses. Bonuses by us is something that it's not used like it used to. I remember in the COVID days, I'm sure people here that operated during COVID can attest to this. Thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, just in bonuses and things like that. So we look at that very heavily, and we basically want our administrators to explain to us why those are happening. The other things we look at is PTO, right? We want to make sure that it's trending correctly. Are there a lot of people taking off? Not a lot of people taking off. Our belief as a company is that if people are not taking off, it's not a healthy company, right? So we want to make sure people are taking off. We don't like seeing not a lot of PTO. It doesn't make a lot of sense to us. So those are some of the, I guess, things that we're looking at. I will tell you that our system does review it line by line, or I will say line by line, every few lines, and every single administrator is looking at it with us. And I'll also add the better administrators in our system have a better understanding of the payroll because it really shows them what's happening. Are you overtime? Are you not staffing enough? By the way, that's another thing we look at. Some people like to think that a lower payroll is a better thing. Not by us. A lower payroll can mean you're just not staffing well enough. And that, for me, keeps me up, right? We want to make sure that we're staffed appropriately. So looking at it, if the payroll's down too much, what is it? So these are just some of the top level things that we look at. And again, the thing that I do that I recommend is to make it a system-wide thing where everybody gets involved. I'll also add to my partner. So he's on the invite, although I don't love when he comes on all of them because I think, I do have an open invite for him. So if he doesn't want to, audit it, come in and see what's happening, he's always welcome to do that. And I'll just also add that my VP of clinical and my VP of ops are also on the call. And that's huge for us because number one, if you have to address anything clinically, I'm not a clinical person. I'm not here to address clinical items. My nurses are. And from an operations perspective, I'm not involved in the day-to-day in the facilities. Although we travel and we visit all facilities and we know exactly what's going on, I'm not the one who has to face things day to day. So that's why we have our VP of ops who handles those things. And with that, we're able to make decisions and react in real time, which I'll also add is something that changed with Empeon. In the past, because you were getting much of different reports and things weren't standardized, it was taking us a ton of time to analyze everything. And in our industry, real time is key. It's probably the reason that we brought most of our outsourced things in-house because we're people that like to act in real time. And, waiting to get data or having to translate data into, standardized reporting takes a long time with different systems. And it definitely slows you down when it comes to doing things quick, which we need to do.
Thank you. I hear
There you
that loud
go.
and clear. That sounds super smart, and that's very insightful. Thank you.
Mhm.
One of the things I wanted to ask you about is staffing, and I just want to point out for all the participants, if you click on the polls and quizzes, you'll see some questions over there regarding staffing. But from the WeCare perspective, I'd love to hear from you. How do you stay consistent in terms of the quality of care? I know that staffing is a major issue in the industry, relying on agency staff. What's WeCare's approach to that?
So I'm happy you brought up the agency. I will tell you, as someone who's been doing this a long time, and I really hope there are no agency people on here, I hate agencies. Um, I can give you my reasons why. We'll go through some of it now and what you need to do to get rid of agency. I will tell you, I have a family member who has an agency. He's actually my wife's cousin's husband. We're still close. I like him a lot. Sweet guy. And he always comes over to me and he wants to, hey, agent, I'm not interested. And people think that the reason that we don't agency is financially motivated. Now, that's one of the reasons, right? And I'll get into that soon. But for us, it's primarily care related. At the end of the day, we're running, facilities with elderly people, and we have some rehab. And what's the thing that people in facilities want the most? Consistency. It's what it is. They want consistency. We're fortunate, and I say fortunate because I think it's something that is important to our communities that we're in. We're fortunate that we have some dementia units in our buildings. Several of them have it. And unfortunately, or fortunately, they're full. And taking care of those type of residents requires consistency. At the end of the day, when you have agency staff, there's no consistency. Besides for that, there's no accountability. I know this is being recorded, so I'll be maybe a little vague on this. I had an incident in one of my facilities on New Year's Eve many years ago. An employee was doing something inappropriate. It was an agency employee. They took a video of it and they posted it somewhere. And about 6 months later, the Department of Health came, this years ago, something really inappropriate. And the Department of Health said this, hey, what are you doing about this? And what could we do? It was an agency employee. So there's no accountability because at the end of the day, any agency employee can just get up and say, you know what, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to go to building B, C, D, E, F, G. Every single building they can go to. So for us, it's not only financial, it's primarily related to care, consistency, and accountability. So how do you get rid of agency, or what do you do with agency? And I'm not going to give everything away. I think some of this, people have to figure out. The first thing I'm going to say is it starts with courage. There's no other thing. You need the courage to do it. It's very difficult. I'm sure people on this webinar, although I can't see anyone, maybe I should or shouldn't, I'm sure they know what I'm talking about. Facilities that have agency-reliant agency. We have taken over buildings, many buildings that have 80+ agency in them. Okay, so I'll just quickly, a piece of advice, if anyone's onboarding any buildings or things like that, the best thing you could do for onboarding a building is somehow get into the building. Obviously, you got to work with the sellers and whatnot, but the best thing to do is to start before you get in. Because once you get in, it gets much more difficult. So that's number one, right? If you could start early, it's better. Number two, it takes courage. It takes courage from your administrator, your director of nursing, any of your regional and corporate team, because it is going to be painful, right? The challenges with agency that I find is that staff don't really realize what they're doing, right? They don't realize the agency they're bringing in. They don't realize the cost of it. They don't realize the hours they're using, the bonuses they're approving, the overtime they're using. You don't see it. And when you're not using it in a payroll system, I'll just tie back into payroll. When people are not clocking in and you're not seeing it in real time, you're ending up with agency bills and issues that just pile up before you can even get ahead of it. You could turn around after 2, 3, 4 weeks and be $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 in the hole and say, but how'd that happen? Right? So from that side of things, people don't realize, and they're never going to realize, I don't think, because at the end of the day, when you're in a building and you're trying to get staff and you need to make certain PPDs or HPPDs, you struggle with it and I'll run into agency. So for us to start, it's courage and it's the will to do it, right? It also takes buy-in from everybody. You got to get the facility to buy in to do it. I'll also add that as a company, one thing that we do is, we have a strong culture. I know a lot of companies say it, and I'm sure a lot of companies have it. And it's something that we work on every single day. If you think we don't have issues every single day, you're certainly wrong. We have issues every single day. We have turnover. We have things like everyone else. But as a company, we try to do the right thing for our staff always. And this goes against the agent thing, right? Because staff want to be part of a company that are going to take care of them. We offer very good benefits. We have a 401k with a match. And we spend more money. I'll tell you that I think that having your own staff is a little more expensive than using agency, right? We pay insurance on our staff. There are benefits. There's PTO. There's, again, the 401k. There's a lot of things that we pay for. But we find as a company, we're so much stronger with that agency. You're able to do things you're not able to do. And at the end of the day, our care is significantly better post-agency. All of our metrics that go to care have gone up. And I've seen it only to be good. So how do you get rid of agency? Again, starts with courage and buy-in. It starts with your schedule. You have to start with a schedule. If you don't have a schedule, if you don't have a master schedule, there's nothing. You can't do anything, right? I know a lot of people go into buildings and they kind of think what's happening is correct. I would say when you get into a facility, you have to look at the scheduling, see where everyone is, see where your holes are, see where they're struggling, and go from there. And I'll also say that there are times that our company would need agency, right? It still could happen once in a while. When it's done on a very controlled basis with reporting that's done almost every single day and every single week. I'll also let into another thing that we do is we've hired a full-time director of scheduling who oversees our schedulers and the entire process. So if there are any questions, we have somebody to talk to outside of the facility who's managing the schedules. So again, that's kind of my very broad overview on agency, what we did. And it's a fight every single day. I don't want to think that it's once you fix it, it's gone forever. Adjusting rates, looking at the market, and constantly coming up with new things that are interesting and unique to keep your staff interested in working for you directly, which we've been relatively successful at.
Yeah, look, that's not easy, and like you said, it takes a certain level of being brave and being willing to make that commitment. But you've seen the results. They kind of speak for themselves when you come out the other
Um, you can't even imagine. The results have been astonishing from a financial end. I know I said it's not financially motivated, but there's a massive savings in just having a clean schedule and having staff that works for you clocking in. But I told you on the care metrics are significantly better since we don't have agency.
Awesome. Um, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about software. As you're looking to scale, you were talking about bringing everything under one platform with Empeon. How's that been helpful in terms of workforce management? Just give me some insights there into how software has helped you grow.
So I think the big part of it all, well, not a big part. I think when I got to my first building, my first real building, it was in July of 2018. I know that we said we started in December of 2017, but July in 2018, we got our first opportunity to take a facility out of bankruptcy. And I remember going into the HR office and everything is in folders and files piled up in drawers and things like that. And I remember thinking, oh, this is not bad. But at the end of the day, in our industry, there are a lot of people that come through our systems. And one of the things of, streamlining was having a program that put everything together. I'd like to point out that, we're talking about Empeon, right? I have access to Empeon. I think a lot of people do, and, companies. I actually know how to get in and use it. I think that's one of the things that maybe I could sell people on now is that it's pretty user friendly. I go on a pretty regular basis just to get data on staff, to find things, to look at different payroll things. But again, we're also storing a lot of our HR data in there. What we've also been able to do with Empion's help is not centralized, but maybe what's the word I'm looking for? Mm, Standardize onboarding. So that's something we didn't do before, and that's a humongous thing. I'll just back into my agency and all these things. One of the things that will save time is standardizing your processes. I know that a lot of people take over buildings, and again, they're taking over from other operators and different systems, and it's standardized maybe to the last operator. Empeon helped us standardize. Our onboarding is standardized. Again, still always a work in progress, but it's standardized. And that's really important, especially when you're hiring in our industry, right? We took over a portfolio of buildings last year, and they were losing a ton of money. And the primary reason they were losing a ton of money was staffing. Agency was 80+%. They were losing, I'm not exaggerating here, I know the numbers here. The portfolio was a few buildings, well over $1.5 million a month, 1.25 million a month. I have the numbers. And a lot of it was staffing related. And I guess we came in and we said to them, hey, why don't you hire? Like, you're a good system, like you offer good benefit, like you could do this. And I don't remember the exact timeline, but I think we came out that from interview to onboarding was a 3-month process. In our industry, you don't have 3 months. When you're hiring a CNA, an LPN, a dietary person, housekeeper, you don't have 3 months. You have a day or 2 or 3 max, right? People are coming for a job. They don't have the luxury and the flexibility to be like, hey, whenever you get back to me is fine, I'll start, right? So people need to work. What they do is important and we need them to work. So one of the things that we work on and we constantly look at is our onboarding process. How long does it take? Is it really standardized? There are things we have to do, right? We have to do TB testing. We have to do background checks. There's paperwork. Standardizing this is going to save everyone a lot of time, a lot of energy, and honestly, it will help you recruit a lot easier. People want to see that. So just from a software perspective, Empeon has centralized all of our paperwork on the HR side, made a huge difference. I mentioned this prior. It used to be that we'd have 2 softwares for time and attendance and for payroll. That's a big issue. That was a huge issue. Now that I'm like thinking back to it, I have a little bit of PTSD from it because it never worked and we'd have to download it and upload. Disaster, especially on new buildings where you really don't even know what you're looking for, right? You're just hoping that it comes out and your payroll looks like a modicum of what it could be. You don't actually know. So standardizing things across the board has been huge for us. having a system that is all in one has been tremendous and probably the primary seller for us, because it is very painful to pull two softwares together, especially when you have a lot of things that go into software. Time and attendance, clocking in, missing punches, late punches, punches that start in the middle of the night, that end, that people come in and out. It's a huge thing for us. It has saved us hours and hours and hours, tens, I mean, I would say now over the time that we've done this, probably hundreds of hours now by having everything in one system. I don't worry anymore. I remember sitting before payrolls, just worried that system A would not talk to system B. Why? Because I've had it happen where it didn't work. And then you end up in real trouble where you're manually trying to get payroll right. So for us, on a software perspective, having everything centralized is huge. From a scaling perspective, it's huge. I don't know if we're going to get more into scaling, we might, but I'll tell you, now that we were doing this a while, it's a lot easier to onboard facilities. So this took time, and I think one of the reasons why, when we've grown slowly as a company, we added buildings very strategically. We're not the type of operators who like to just add, whenever we see things. We're very strategic with it. But at the end of the day, once we got our payroll systems streamlined, standardized, going into a building became a much easier endeavor for us. We recently went into a building in March of 2025, was the last building we went into. And that building was on the hopper for a long time, whatever issues, delays, this and that. But I remember thinking before we went in, I don't need that much time to go in. It used to be I need a lot more time to get in. I know I mentioned the agency things, you need time, but I was talking on just my job, the hardest thing is when I take over a building is getting all the systems set up. So it used to be, I'd be nervous and I'd say, when do you want to go in? I need 30, 45, 60 days. I got to get everything right. It's not like that at all anymore. We've been partnering with Empeon for a long time. For us, it's a simple phone call. It's an email. Guys, here's the plan. Fill out the paperwork. We get the time clock sent in, and we're locked and loaded, right? We have it set up. Obviously, things are happening in the back end, but it's a much simpler process. Our ability to onboard is a much simpler, and our ability to grow is much simpler. I'm much more confident taking over more buildings now than I was a year ago, 2 years ago, and 3 years ago. Just doing it more and more and more has certainly enabled us to be a lot more, able to do it. And I'll tell you that the payroll system being connected with everything else has been a humongous help for us in doing this.
That's amazing. I definitely have heard the PTSD stories before and totally
Brutal.
understand where you're coming from. So these are great insights. Thank you. I want you to now kind of take a step back. You're talking to SNF leaders, people in the industry. What's some advice that you would give them, either things that maybe you would have done differently or suggestions for how they can grow their business?
Yeah. So as I said before, and this is something I don't know if I would have done differently because I didn't have the experience then. So I guess maybe now I'll say, if you could pick one system and stick with it, going in. I think that my fear from the multi-facilities and having different systems held us back in areas that we could have been a lot better in. If somebody would say to me right now, hey, you're taking over a building A, B, C, D, E, why don't you leave their systems in? I would be very hesitant to do that. I would really not. It's something that I would tell my prior self to say, hey, as painful as it is, it makes sense to go to one system right away. It gets rid of a lot of issues. It standardizes a lot of things. Payroll records, I'll just tell everyone here, and maybe this is also something I would do differently. Everything always comes back, right? You think you're done with a year, you filed everything, you're done, all good. It's not how it works. Everything always comes back. I brought up COVID before, where you very badly needed payroll records to get loans, to get credits. You needed it. Department of Labor, requests. Again, we're in the SNF industry. PBJ is humongous for us, especially now. And I also believe that as a country, more and more revenue is going to be tied to staffing and quality. I think that's where we're going to go. I think that there was a moratorium now for the next 10 years on the federal staffing mandate. I don't think it really matters. I think at the end of the day, people are going to demand more staffing, and states are going to demand more staffing as well. And how they're going to pay for it? Well, they're going to, by having good staffing and having better metrics, they're going to pay for it. So having your system set up earlier and that you're able to track and do things earlier is critical. I don't think you can expand and really grow fast if your systems are not standardized. And I don't really say this against payroll. This is across all systems. It's significantly easier to do something when you have every single system that you like, set up to your specifications, ready to go into a new building when you go in. Or by the way, and I'll just add, it doesn't matter how many buildings, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It doesn't matter. If the systems are standard, right? The systems are standard. We have a saying, and I think this is a common in, I think, just employment or when things are getting done, is it a person or is it a system, right? Whenever we analyze any problems or issues, is it a person, is it people's problem, or is it a system problem? So I'll say that getting your systems correct in the beginning, and really picking the right systems in the beginning will have a massive effect on outcomes later. As much as you don't think, trust me, being in TOL audits, PBJ audits, funding during COVID, all the other miscellaneous things that come up that people need, standardized systems is the way to go. And that's I would say the number one thing that I can tell everyone here is standardize your systems before you go anywhere.
Yeah, fantastic.
Mm.
That's great. So we've taken up a lot of your time. I want to just maybe push my luck a little bit more. We've got one or two questions that are coming in.
Mhm.
Folks, anyone who's still on the call, please feel free to participate in the poll over there. We've got some great feedback on the poll questions, and if you want to ask Gedaliah a question, use the Q&A section over there. I'm just taking a look at some of the results from the polls. Definitely high agency usage is coming across in people who are participating. Seeing
Um,
a high.
one thing I'll add about agency, and just another thing that you brought up, and I'll give credit to my partner on this. A lot of issues with agency is that they kind of hold the staff hostage. And what we've seen is that, and this is why we hate agency, is that a lot of times agencies will come in and they'll take your staff and they'll take other facility staff and they basically just rent it back to you at a profit for them. Doesn't make a lot of sense. We went into a building, we have a building in Greene County in Pennsylvania. It's on the border of West Virginia. I'm not exaggerating. I think this number is accurate. I think we came in, they had 13 or 30, I think maybe 30 agency contracts.
What?
So my partner asked the question, are there even enough people for this? No, of course not. When agencies come in, they're just advertising $1 more or $2 more than you, than the next agency, and all they're doing is perpetuating this issue. So in New York, there's non-competes or whatnot, where basically they can hold staff hostage from working for you. Pennsylvania, post-COVID, and it's a compliment to the state, our associations and whatnot, they pushed a law in Pennsylvania where you're not allowed to do that. There's no non-competes. So what we do, and all the agencies that we've used and having to use or maybe use in the future, they know right away that we're going to move and take those staff, right? I think we make it very clear that the staff is going to come to us. And I think that's something that has to be done in the building, right? It's a constant recruitment effort for staff. If you have agency staff in your building, the ones here that have a lot of agency, you have to constantly try to recruit them. You can't just assume that they're going to apply and want to work in your facility. You have to go and try to recruit them to work for you, right? It's a big part of it. One of the things I'll also add, one of our strategies, and this works, and this is why I say you need courage with agency. We have a dead date. We set dead dates for agency. A lot of staff will say, oh, we'll come, we won't come. They don't think you're going to pull the trigger and get rid of agency. So they'll stay as an agency staff. If they see that you're serious about pulling the trigger and saying, guys, effective August 1st, it's over. No matter, come, as my mother would say, come hell or hot water, we're done. People see that you're serious, they'll start moving over. Because I think a lot of time people think that agency staff, I know this might be a contradiction of what I said earlier about accountability, but a lot of people know on this call that there are certain agency staff that want to work with you. They do, right? They're just getting a little bit of $1 more, $2 more, things like that. And that's what's holding them back. But if you actually recruited them, and again, you can get creative on recruiting, sign-on bonuses, add-on rates for sometimes, things like that. If you're not going to recruit them and try to get them, they're not going to come to you. And we'll be very clear. Agency staff is not just going to move over to you because you maybe put out an ad once or twice. It is a constant that you have to go after them to bring them in. So I don't know, just because you mentioned on the poll, I want to say that's another thing you got to do. It's a constant you have to be after it, or else it's not going to happen.
Excellent. So I'm going to give folks just another minute or two if they want to ask any questions in the Q&A. We have one that came in over here. We're currently an organization with 2 or 3 facilities looking to grow, possibly across states. What advice would you give to get prepared for the scaling process? And I know you kind of talked about that with get your systems sort of streamlined and in place, but anything you want to add?
Yeah, I don't know what states you're in, wherever this question is from, but you got to be very careful on the states you're going to. And I don't mean that in a sniff side of things. I'm talking mainly on labor. New York is a highly labor regulated state. I'll give you guys an example. Actually, I'm going to ask a question. I don't know how many of you are New York operators, but do you know? Well, not really a question, more of a statement. Do you know that in New York we are still paying COVID pay? Do you know up until the end of this month, if somebody is gone on COVID in our facilities, they get, I believe it's a week and then another week, they can get up to 2 weeks with COVID. So yeah, no, I know it's crazy. And don't get me started in New York and those things. So my recommendation is to reach out to a local labor attorney. Even before that, you can use ChatGPT. Really try to gain an understanding of the labor laws. You don't need to be an expert. You just need to know the basics of what's happening. I'll also add, and this is something that Empeon's helped us with, a lot of different places you're going to have different taxes that need to be set up. I've dealt with this. SD, I know has dealt with this. A lot of places you go, you think, oh, it's state and federal. A lot of localities have their own taxes, cities and things like that. Empeon's very good at this. But this is something that you should go in and know about in advance, because what's going to end up happening is you're going to set it up and not know. And then you're going to file your W-2s for your staff. And I promise you this call is going to come. You're going to get a call from one of your employees and they're going to say, hey, you didn't withhold any taxes for, the town of Latrobe. And you're going to say, I don't know what you're talking about. And they're going to have a payroll liability. And it's going to be an issue for you and for them. So I would tell you, take a look at the communities you're going into, at the states you're going into, at the towns and cities you're going into. They each have their own little kind of, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. They each have their own things you need. What do you find?
Nuance.
Yeah, good word. They all have their nuances. And if you don't know them, if you're just going to guess, you're going to be in trouble later. So I would really take that into account, knowing what the state and local regulations are, especially when it comes to setting up, because that stuff will bite you really fast. And again, you don't want to harm your employees. And these are things that your employees expect you to know, whether or not you're not a state expert, doesn't matter. There's something that you're expected to know. So my recommendation is expanding across state lines, is being very careful on just setting up the things correctly. And this is not only payroll, this is across the board. Whatever you're setting up, your entities and all those things, you got to be very careful that you're setting them up properly.
Excellent.
That was
Dali, this
good.
has been, yeah, that was a great answer. This has been an absolute pleasure and treat. I love your shirt, by the way.
Yeah,
I
thank
want
you.
to thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks everyone for participating. We're going to wrap it up now. Have a great day.
All right, thank you.
Bye bye.